The alarm bells screamed across Border Station Omega-7 like wounded animals in the night. Technician Veltar pressed his scaled hands against the console as red lights bathed the control room in urgent warning. The massive detection array had picked up something that shouldn't exist, a ship moving at speeds that violated every known law of physics. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, distance closing fast," shouted Operations Officer Dale from across the command center. His tentacles danced over multiple screens while sweat beaded on his blue-tinted forehead. "Whatever that thing is, it's not showing up in any of our databases." Commander Veltar's reptilian eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. In his 40 years of service to the Galactic Council, he had never seen energy signatures like these. The approaching vessel seemed to bend space around itself, creating ripples in the fabric of reality that made his instruments give contradictory readings. One moment it appeared to be a small fighter craft, the next it registered as a massive dreadnought. "Run a full spectrum analysis," Veltar ordered, his voice carrying the authority of countless battles. "I want to know everything about that ship before it gets within weapons range." The border station hummed with activity as dozens of technicians worked frantically at their posts. Omega-7 was no ordinary outpost. It guarded one of the most sensitive regions of Council space, where 3 major trade routes converged near the contested Therian sector. Nothing moved through this area without proper authorization, and certainly nothing moved this fast. "Sir, the vessel is hailing us," reported communications specialist Nora, her ears twitching nervously. The feline officer's fur stood on end as she adjusted her headset. "The signal is coming through on frequencies we don't even monitor. How are they accessing our communication arrays?" Veltar felt his blood run cold. The station's communication systems were protected by the most advanced encryption the Council's best minds could devise. No unauthorized ship should be able to penetrate their networks, let alone broadcast on secure channels. "Put it through," he commanded, moving to the center of the command platform. The main view screen flickered to life, showing not the expected alien face but something far more disturbing, a human male with calm brown eyes and graying hair at his temples. He wore a simple black uniform with no visible rank insignia, but something in his bearing suggested absolute confidence. "This is Captain Reed of the Terran vessel Defiance," the human said, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "We're here to talk." Silence fell over the command center like a heavy blanket. Every officer present knew the name Terra from their history lessons, the Forbidden World, whose inhabitants had been declared extinct 3 centuries ago. The Great Purge of 2387 had been taught as a necessary action to protect galactic civilization. From humanity's dangerous ambitions, Veltar found his voice first. "That's impossible. The Terran system was cleansed generations ago. No humans survived the Council's decision." Captain Reed's expression didn't change, but something flickered. In his eyes, not anger, but something far more unsettling. A kind of patient amusement, as if he were dealing with children who had stumbled upon something beyond their understanding. "Your records are incomplete, Commander," Reed replied. "We've been watching, waiting, and preparing. Now we've decided. It's time to return." The tactical officer, a massive warrior from the Brutox species, stepped forward with his hand on his sidearm. "Sir, this has to be some kind of trick. Maybe they're using human genetic templates or recovered databases too." His words died as every weapon system on the station suddenly went offline. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply inactive, as if someone had reached into the station's core systems and politely asked them to stop working. "How did you do that?" Veltar demanded, but even as he spoke, he realized the futility of the question. The Defiance had somehow penetrated their most secure systems without triggering a single alarm until it was already complete. "We've had 300 years to think about this conversation," Reed said calmly. 300 years to grow, to learn, to become something more than what we were when you tried to destroy us. We're not here for revenge, Commander. We're here for justice." On the tactical display, more contacts began appearing throughout the sector. Ships that materialized out of empty space as if they had been there all along, waiting for some invisible signal. Each one showed the same impossible energy readings as the Defiance, and each one moved with the casual ease of predators who had no fear of their prey. "This is a restricted sector," Veltar said, his voice growing desperate. "By council law, you must submit to inspection and registration before your laws don't apply to us." Reed interrupted gently. "They stopped applying the moment your predecessors decided we had no right to exist. We've spent centuries in the dark between stars, Commander. We've learned things that would terrify your council's greatest scientists. We've become something that your people's worst nightmares couldn't imagine." The Defiance moved closer to the station, and now the sensors could barely track it. The ship seemed to phase in and out of normal space, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its hull appeared to be made of materials that absorbed energy rather than reflecting it, creating a void against the starfield that hurt to look at directly. "What do you want?" Veltar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We want the galaxy to know we're back," Reed said. "We want the Council to understand that their great crime has consequences. And we want every species that suffered under their rule to know that change is coming whether the Council wants it or not." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Through the viewports, they could see the Defiance maintaining position just outside the station's defense grid, not because it feared their weapons, but because it chose to wait there. Veltar realized with growing horror that everything he had believed about galactic power structures had just become obsolete. The humans weren't extinct, and they weren't the primitive species the Council had tried to eliminate centuries ago. They had become something else entirely, something that made the galaxy's most advanced civilizations look like children playing with fire. The age of the Galactic Council was ending, and none of them had even realized it until this moment. Emergency session protocols hadn't been activated in over 2 centuries, but today the great council chambers on Nexus Station buzzed with desperate energy. Representatives from 47 member species filled the curved amphitheater while holographic displays showed disturbing reports from across the galaxy. High Chancellor Kresthek of the ancient Valdorian Empire raised her crystalline hand for silence. Her species had ruled the galactic core for millennia, but today uncertainty clouded her normally confident features. The news from border station Omega-7 had spread like wildfire through secure channels, and worse reports continued to arrive every hour. "The situation is more serious than we initially believed," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Long-range sensors have detected massive structures moving in the void beyond our mapped territories. We're not dealing with a single ship or even a small fleet." Delegate Torix from the militaristic hegemony world stood abruptly, his cybernetic implants gleaming under the chamber's lights. "How many ships are we talking about, Chancellor? Give us numbers so we can plan an appropriate response." Tactical display activated, showing the galaxy's outer rim where deep space monitoring stations had been picking up anomalous readings for weeks. What they had dismissed as sensor ghosts or natural phenomena now took on a terrifying new meaning. "Conservative estimates suggest several thousand vessels," Kresthek replied, watching as shocked murmurs rippled through the assembly. "But these numbers may be meaningless. Our analysts believe we're seeing only a fraction of their actual presence." Military advisor Fengdal stepped forward, his 6 arms gesturing at the holographic data. His species had spent generations studying warfare across the galaxy, but the readings before them defied conventional analysis. "The energy signatures don't match any known propulsion or weapon systems," he explained. "These ships appear to exist partially outside normal spacetime. They can become invisible to our sensors at will, and they seem to draw power directly from stellar radiation and quantum fluctuations." A delegate from the outer colonies raised her voice above the growing chatter. "You're telling us that humans somehow developed technology beyond anything we possess? They were barely spacefaring when we destroyed their world." The chamber fell silent as everyone considered the implications. The official records were clear: humanity had been eliminated because their rapid technological advancement and aggressive expansion threatened galactic stability. The Council's finest military strategists had calculated that humans would become unstoppable if allowed to continue their development. Perhaps, Chancellor Krestek said slowly, our actions 3 centuries ago achieved exactly what we feared. Most, we forced them to evolve or die, and they chose evolution. Archive Keeper Moltar accessed the restricted historical databases, his ancient face grave as he reviewed classified documents. His species lived for thousands of years, and he had been present during the original debates about the human problem. The records show that human technology was advancing at an exponential rate before the Purge, he reported. They had achieved faster-than-light travel within 50 years of discovering nuclear fusion. Their artificial intelligence research was progressing toward true consciousness. Most disturbing of all, they had begun experimenting with dimensional physics. So we drove them into the darkness with incomplete but promising technology, observed Representative Yulandra from the Science Councils. 300 years of desperate research with survival as their only motivation. What would that create? The answer came from an unexpected source. Every screen in the chamber suddenly displayed the same image: Captain Reed's calm face, speaking directly to the assembled delegates as if he were standing among them. You're wondering what you created when you tried to destroy us? Reed said, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast space. You're reviewing your historical files and calculating possibilities. Let me save you the trouble. Security forces rushed toward the chamber's entrances, but the doors had sealed themselves. No alarms sounded, no defense systems activated. The human captain continued speaking as if he owned the station's entire network. We didn't just survive your great purge, Reed explained. We transcended it. While you spent centuries fighting over resources and territory, we learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. We built cities in folded space and drew energy from the quantum foam itself. The holographic displays around the chamber changed, showing images that hurt to look at directly. Vast structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Ships that moved through space-time like dolphins through water, and technologies that appeared to violate every known law of physics. You feared what we might become, Reed continued. Your fear was justified, but your solution was flawed. You cannot destroy potential, you can only redirect it. And you redirected ours toward survival at any cost. Delegate Torix drew his ceremonial weapon, though he had no clear target. What do you want from us, human? Are you here for revenge? Reed's expression softened slightly, showing something almost like pity. Revenge would be easy. We could unmake your civilizations. With a thought. We could turn your stars into black holes or redirect your planets into empty space. But that would make us what you once claimed we were, a threat to galactic peace. Then what? Chancellor Krestak asked, her voice barely audible. Justice, Reed replied simply. The Galactic Council ends today. The species you've oppressed will be free. The resources you've hoarded will be redistributed. And you will learn to coexist peacefully, whether you choose to or not. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. Through the great viewports, they could see ships materializing around Nexus Station, not threatening, but simply present like monuments to humanity's return. Representative Yulandra was the first to speak, her voice hollow with understanding. They're not invading us. They're managing us. Military advisor Fengdal looked at his tactical displays, all of which showed the same message. Weapon systems offline, have a nice day. The human fleet hadn't destroyed their defenses, they had simply asked them to stop working, and somehow the machines had complied. How do we fight an enemy that can rewrite our technology at will? He asked, though he already knew the answer. We don't, Chancellor Krestek said quietly. We can't. The age of council rule is over, and we never even saw it coming. Outside, the great chamber, across a galaxy that had known only council authority for over 1,000 years, similar scenes played out on countless worlds. Humanity had returned not as conquerors but as gardeners, pruning the galactic tree they had been. Cut from so long ago. Admiral Beth Cross had built her reputation crushing rebellions across the galaxy's outer rim. Her battle fleet, the finest the Council had ever assembled, represented centuries of military innovation and tactical experience. Today, as she watched, her ship's weapon systems refused to target the human vessels surrounding them. She realized that none of it mattered anymore. "Status report," she commanded, though the answer was written across every display in her command center. The dreadnought Eternal Justice, flagship of the Council's most elite squadron, drifted helplessly in space while human ships moved around them like sharks circling wounded prey. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, her tactical officer for the past 12 years, looked up from his console with defeat written across his features. "All weapons offline, Admiral. Not damaged or destroyed, they simply won't respond to commands. Our targeting computers display error messages in languages that don't exist in our databases." Through the bridge's main viewport, Cross could see the human fleet in all its impossible glory. Ships that seemed to be carved from crystallized darkness moved through formations that hurt to contemplate. They phased in and out of visible space, sometimes appearing as small fighters, other times revealing themselves as massive constructs. "Larger than moons?" "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the fleet," Communications Officer Park reported, his voice strained. "The same thing is happening to every ship in the Armada? Weapons offline, shields non-responsive, engines running at minimum power." Only Cross had commanded fleets in battles against some of the galaxy's most dangerous threats. She had seen her ships torn apart by enemy fire and watched good officers die in the vacuum of space. But she had never experienced anything like this, the complete negation of military power through means she couldn't even comprehend. "Open a channel to the human command ship," she ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing Captain Reed's calm features. Behind him, the bridge of his vessel defied understanding walls that seemed to bend inward toward infinity, control systems that appeared to operate through pure thought, and crew members who moved with the fluid grace of beings no longer bound by normal physical limitations. "Admiral Cross," Reed said, somehow knowing her name and rank without introduction. "I've read your service record. You've spent your career enforcing Council rule across 17 sectors. 14 rebellions crushed, 3 entire species relocated to mining colonies, countless independent worlds brought under Imperial control." "I was following orders," Cross replied, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Maintaining peace and stability across the galaxy." Reed's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, not anger or judgment, but something far more unsettling. A kind of infinite patience, as if he were explaining simple concepts to a child who couldn't yet understand their implications. "Peace through oppression isn't peace, Admiral. It's just delayed war. And stability built on inequality always collapses eventually. We learned that lesson during our long exile in the dark." Around the fleet, more human ships appeared, materializing out of empty space with casual ease. Each one displayed technology that made the Council's finest vessels look like primitive toys. Their hulls seemed to absorb energy rather than reflect it, creating voids against the star field that sensors couldn't properly track. "What do you want from us?" Cross asked, though she suspected the answer would reshape everything she thought. She knew about power in the galaxy. "We want you to watch," Reed replied simply. "We want every officer in your fleet to see what happens when justice finally catches up with injustice. Your weapons won't fire because we've asked them not to. Your ships won't flee because we need witnesses to what comes next." The tactical display activated, showing Council territory throughout the galaxy. Red indicators marked fleet positions, trade routes, and strategic installations. One by one, the indicators began changing color as human forces revealed themselves at key locations across known space. "This is impossible," whispered Sensor Operator Dale from his station. "They're everywhere at once. No species has this many ships, this much coordination. Where did they come from?" Reed heard the question through the open channel and smiled, though there was no warmth in the expression. "We built cities in folded space, Admiral. Habitats that exist between dimensions, drawing energy from the quantum substrate itself. While your species fought over planets and moons, we learned to Create our own reality. On the display, human vessels began systematically approaching Council installations. Not attacking, but simply arriving and waiting. At each location, the same phenomenon occurred. Weapon systems shut down, defensive grids went offline, and communication networks fell under human control. "You're taking over the entire galaxy without firing a shot," Cross observed, her tactical mind finally grasping the scope of what she was witnessing. "We're not taking over anything," Reed corrected. Gently, "we're returning property to its rightful owners. Every world the Council conquered, every species they enslaved, every resource they claimed by force, all of it goes back to the people it was stolen from." The implications hit Cross like a physical blow. The Galactic Council's authority rested on military might and economic control. If humans could neutralize both without opposition, then the entire structure of galactic civilization would collapse overnight. "The economic disruption alone will cause chaos," she protested. "Billions will die if you destroy the trade networks and resource distribution systems." "We're not destroying anything," Reed replied. "We're rebuilding it. Watch your secondary displays, Admiral." New information began flowing across the fleet's screens, shipping manifests, resource allocation charts, and production schedules that showed impossible efficiency improvements. Human technology wasn't just superior in military applications. It could transform every aspect of galactic society. "Scarcity economics only work when resources are actually scarce," Reed explained. "When you can draw energy directly from stellar cores and manipulate matter at the quantum level, the old rules stop applying. We're going to show every species in the galaxy what abundance looks like." Lieutenant Commander Hayes looked up from his console with wonder and terror written across his face. "Admiral, they're transmitting technical specifications to our engineering departments. Medicine that can extend lifespans by centuries, environmental restoration techniques, fusion processes that produce no waste." "They're bribing us, Cross." "Realized we're offering partnership," Reed corrected. The Council maintained power through artificial scarcity and military intimidation. "We're offering prosperity and protection. Which do you think most species will choose?" The answer was already becoming clear as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Council member worlds weren't resisting human occupation, they were welcoming it. Populations that had lived under imperial rule for generations suddenly found themselves offered freedom, advanced technology, and protection from the very forces that had oppressed them. Admiral Cross, veteran of countless battles and architect of imperial expansion, finally understood that she was witnessing the end of an age. The humans hadn't just returned from exile, they had evolved beyond the need for traditional conquest. They were reshaping galactic civilization through pure technological superiority, and resistance was not just futile but pointless. "What happens to us?" she asked quietly. "You learn to live in a galaxy where might doesn't make right," Reed replied. "You adapt to a universe where every species has value and where justice matters more than profit. Some of you will struggle with the transition. Others will discover that freedom feels better than power." The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Cross alone with the knowledge that her entire career had been built on foundations that no longer existed. The great doors of the Council chambers had been sealed with locks that could withstand planetary bombardment, but Captain Reed walked through them as if they were made of morning mist. Security forces raised their weapons only to watch helplessly as the devices dissolved into harmless particles that drifted to the floor like snow. High Chancellor Kresthak felt her crystalline body temperature drop as Reed approached the speaker's podium without invitation. He moved with fluid grace that seemed to bend space around him, and when he spoke, his voice reached every corner of the vast chamber without amplification. 300 years ago, you gathered in chambers much like this one to debate our fate." Reed began, his calm brown eyes scanning the assembled delegates. "You decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist, too unpredictable to be allowed among civilized species. Today I stand before you to discuss the consequences of that decision." Delegate Torex from the hegemony world stood abruptly, his cybernetic implants sparking with defensive energy. "You have no authority here, human." This is sovereign council territory, protected by laws that have stood for. His words stopped as Reed turned to look at him directly. The cybernetic systems throughout Torix's body simply shut down, not damaged, but politely declined to function. The massive delegate sat down heavily, his enhanced strength reduced to baseline biological levels. Your laws stopped applying to us the moment you declared us extinct, Reed said gently. We've spent centuries beyond your borders, learning to survive in the spaces between stars where your authority never reached. Do you know what that kind of isolation teaches a species? Archive Keeper Moltar, ancient even by his species' standards, leaned forward with genuine curiosity. What did you learn out there in the dark? Reed's expression softened slightly, showing something that might have been nostalgia. We learned that reality is far more flexible than anyone imagined. When you're dying in the void with no resources except your own ingenuity, you discover that the universe has levels of existence your scientists never suspected. The holographic displays around the chamber activated without any visible command, showing images that strained the delegate's comprehension. Vast structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, cities built from crystallized space-time, and beings that had once been human but had become something transcendent. We learned to draw energy directly from quantum fluctuations. Reed continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute knowledge. We discovered how to fold space so that distance becomes meaningless. We developed consciousnesses that can exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. And we realized that the physical laws you consider absolute are really just suggestions that can be politely ignored. Representative Yulandra from the Science Council studied the images with growing awe and terror. You're saying that humanity has evolved beyond biological limitations entirely. Some of us have, Reed acknowledged. Others chose to remain more traditionally human while enhancing their capabilities. We believe in choice, you see. The freedom to become whatever we wish. To be limited only by our imagination and ethical considerations. Chancellor Kresthok found her voice, though it trembled with the effort. What are your ethical considerations? What stops you from simply erasing us as we tried to erase you? Reed was silent for a long moment, and the assembled delegates could feel the weight of 3 centuries of exile, survival, and transformation behind his thoughtful expression. We could unmake your entire civilization without effort, he said finally. We could turn your stars into black holes, redirect your planets into empty space, or simply edit you out of reality like deleting files from a database, but we won't. Because that would make us what you once claimed we were, a threat to galactic peace. Then what do you want? Demanded military advisor Fengdal, his 6 arms spread in a gesture of frustrated confusion. We want you to evolve, Reed replied. Simply. We want every species in this galaxy to discover what they're capable of when they're not limited by artificial scarcity and authoritarian control. We want to see what civilizations can achieve when they cooperate instead of compete. The chambers. Environmental systems began changing without any visible intervention. The air grew cleaner, the lighting became softer and more natural, and delegates found their various physiological stress responses calming despite the circumstances. This is what we offer, Reed explained as comfort settled over the assembly. Not conquest, but elevation. Not domination, but partnership. We've learned to create abundance from nothing, to heal damage that was thought permanent, to transform scarcity into plenty through pure understanding of how reality actually works. On the displays, images began showing human-assisted worlds throughout the galaxy. Planets where environmental damage was being reversed overnight. Species that had lived in poverty suddenly enjoying unprecedented prosperity and civilizations that had been on the brink of collapse flourishing under gentle human guidance. You're offering to be our beneficent overlords. Observed Delegate Lars from the outer colonies, his tone carefully neutral. We're offering to be your partners in evolution, Reed corrected. What you do with that opportunity is entirely up to you. We won't force anyone to accept our help, but we also won't allow the old systems of oppression to continue. The Galactic Council's authority ends today, but what replaces it depends on the choices you make. The great chamber fell silent as delegates struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what they were hearing. The power structures that had defined galactic civilization for over a millennium were dissolving before their eyes, replaced by something so far beyond their experience that they had no frame of reference for understanding it. "What happens to those who refuse your partnership?" asked Chancellor Kresvek. Though she suspected she already knew the answer, Reed's expression grew slightly sad, as if he were disappointed by the question's necessity. "They'll be left alone to develop at their own pace, within boundaries that ensure they can't harm others. We're not interested in ruling anyone, Chancellor. We're interested in creating an environment where every species can reach their full potential." "And if we try to rebuild the Council's military forces? If we attempt to reclaim our authority through force?" "Military advisor." Fengdal's voice carried the desperate edge of a career soldier watching his profession become obsolete. "Your weapons won't work against us," Reed said gently. "Your ships can't reach us. Your strategies are based on limitations we've transcended. Violence has become an ineffective tool for achieving political goals because we simply won't allow it to succeed." The truth settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. Humanity hadn't just returned from exile, they had evolved into something that made traditional concepts of power and authority meaningless. They were offering partnership to species that had tried to destroy them, but the partnership would exist entirely on human terms. "How do we know you won't become tyrants yourselves?" asked Archive Keeper Moltar. "Power corrupts, even among the most well-intentioned species." Reed smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, and the expression carried genuine warmth. "Because we've already faced that choice and decided against it. We could have returned decades ago as conquerors. We could have announced our presence with the destruction of your homeworlds. Instead, we spent additional centuries learning wisdom to match our power. We choose to be gardeners rather than gods, even though we have the capability for both." The session continued for hours, but the fundamental reality never changed. Humanity had returned not as the species the Council had tried to eliminate, but as something that transcended every category of power and authority the galaxy had ever known. And somehow, impossibly, they were offering to share that transcendence with the very civilizations that had condemned them to exile. Former Admiral Beth Cross walked through what had once been Central Command Plaza on Nexus Station, but the space bore little resemblance to the military installation she had known for decades, where stark metal corridors had echoed with the sound of marching boots. Gardens now bloomed under artificial sunlight that felt warmer and more natural than anything the Council's engineers had ever achieved. Children from a dozen different species played together in converted weapon storage areas, their laughter echoing off walls that had once housed instruments of war. The sight should have filled her with despair at the loss of order and authority, but instead she found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Strange how quickly things change, isn't it? Captain Reed appeared beside her without warning, though she had grown accustomed to humans materializing wherever they chose. His presence no longer triggered the fight-or-flight response it had during those first terrifying encounters 6 months ago. "Your people have transformed the entire galaxy in less than a year," Cross observed, watching a young Valdorian child share his lunch with a hegemony youth whose species had been enemies for centuries. "How is that possible?" Reed followed her gaze to the children, and his expression carried the satisfaction of someone watching a long-planned garden finally bloom. When you remove artificial barriers and provide unlimited resources, cooperation becomes the logical choice. Most species prefer peace to conflict when peace becomes more profitable than war. Through the plaza's transparent walls, Cross could see the massive human city ships that now orbited every major population center in the galaxy. They weren't weapons platforms or occupation forces, they were resource centers, medical facilities, and educational institutions that freely shared advanced technology with any species willing to learn. The Brutok Confederation surrendered their entire military fleet yesterday, she reported, though she knew Reed was already aware of this development. They're requesting human assistance with terraforming their outer colonies. And we'll provide it, Reed replied. The Brutok have always been warriors by necessity, not choice. Give them habitable worlds and sufficient resources, and they become some of the galaxy's finest architects and engineers. The transformation hadn't been uniformly smooth. Some Council loyalists had attempted resistance, organizing secret fleets and hidden bases to continue the fight against human occupation. Their efforts had proven futile not because humans destroyed their forces, but because the forces simply refused to function when ordered to cause harm. I still don't understand the technical aspects, Cross admitted. How do you make weapons malfunction just by asking them to stop working? Reed's smile carried the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a curious child. Matter responds to consciousness at the quantum level. When you understand the fundamental nature of reality, when you realize that the boundary between mind and matter is an illusion, you can communicate with the universe itself. We don't force our technology to work. We simply ask it politely, and it chooses to cooperate. The implications had revolutionized every aspect of galactic society. Manufacturing had become a process of conscious creation rather than industrial production. Environmental restoration happened through cooperation between human consciousness and natural systems. Even space travel had transformed from mechanical propulsion to something that resembled controlled dreaming. Lord Commander Vex tried to restart weapons production on the Outer Rim colonies last week. Cross mentioned, testing Reed's reaction to news of continued resistance. We know, Reed replied calmly. The fabrication units produced flowers instead of ammunition. Vex spent 3 days trying to figure out what was wrong with his assembly lines before giving up and requesting agricultural assistance. He'll make an excellent farmer once he accepts that the old ways are gone forever. Through the plaza's communication systems, reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy. Trade routes that had been controlled by council monopolies now operated as free exchanges where any species could participate. Mining colonies that had existed solely to extract resources for imperial use had become independent worlds developing their own cultures and technologies with human guidance. What about the outer reaches? Cross asked. There are still sectors that refuse all contact with human forces. They're free to develop at their own pace, Reed answered, his tone carrying no judgment. We've established monitoring stations to ensure they don't threaten their neighbors, but beyond that, isolation is their choice to make. Some species need more time to accept change. The most remarkable transformation had occurred among species that had been oppressed under council rule. The Zephyrian slave colonies had been liberated overnight, their former masters simply finding that their control systems no longer functioned. Within weeks, the Zephyrians had established thriving independent societies with human technological assistance. I received a message from my former flagship crew yesterday, Cross mentioned. Half of them have joined human exploration missions to the Galactic Rim. The other half are attending universities that didn't exist 6 months ago. Education is the foundation of evolution, Reed observed. Your people weren't evil, Admiral, they were simply operating within systems that rewarded the wrong behaviors. Change the systems, and the behaviors change with them. A young human child ran past them, chasing a ball while laughing with pure joy. Cross studied the girl carefully, noting the way she seemed to glide rather than run, how she occasionally became slightly translucent when excited, and the way plants grew slightly greener in her wake. The new generation is different from you, she observed. Reed nodded, his expression carrying both pride and something that might have been wistfulness. They're being born into a universe without scarcity or conflict. They're developing capabilities that even we find surprising. In another century, they may have evolved beyond our ability to understand them. Doesn't that worry you? The possibility that they might surpass even human wisdom and decide that the older species are obsolete? Reed was quiet for a long moment, watching the children play in the gardens that had replaced military installations. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of careful consideration. We've taught them that wisdom grows with power, not despite it, he said softly. The greatest strength is knowing when not to use your abilities. They understand that evolution means lifting others up, not leaving them behind. A soft chime echoed through the plaza, and Cross recognized the signal for the daily galactic status report. Holographic displays materialized throughout the space, showing real-time data from thousands of worlds across known space. Every indicator showed the same impossible trend war had simply stopped happening. Conflict Resolution Center's report. 0 active military engagements, galaxy-wide, announced the synthetic voice that had replaced the old Council's propaganda broadcasts. Resource distribution efficiency has reached 99.7%. Environmental restoration projects ahead of schedule. On 847 worlds. Educational enrollment up 340% across all participating species. Former Delegate Torix approached them across the plaza, his cybernetic implants now serving medical rather than military functions. The massive hegemony warrior had become one of the galaxy's most effective peace negotiators, using his combat experience to understand and prevent conflicts before they could escalate. Captain Reed, Admiral Cross, he nodded respectfully. I wanted to report on the Outer Rim situation. The holdout sectors have agreed to limited cultural exchange programs. No political integration yet, but they're curious about our medical advances. Patience builds trust, Reed replied. Some species need to discover change for themselves rather than having it offered to them. As long as they're not harming others, their isolation is perfectly acceptable. Cross found herself thinking about her own transformation over the past months. The career military officer who had built her identity around council authority and imperial order had gradually discovered interests she never knew she possessed. She now spent her days working with former enemies to develop peaceful exploration. Missions to uncharted regions of the galaxy. I never thought I'd say this, she admitted, but I don't miss the old ways. I spent 40 years believing that strength meant the ability to destroy your enemies. Now, I'm learning that real strength means making sure no one becomes your enemy in the first place. Reed smiled at this, and for a moment his enhanced humanity seemed to fade, revealing something recognizably similar to the species that had been exiled 3 centuries ago. That understanding took us the better part of 2 centuries to develop. The fact that you've reached it in months shows how much potential your people had all along. The afternoon light began to fade, though on the human city ships it would remain whatever time their inhabitants preferred. Cross had learned that humans no longer lived by planetary cycles, instead choosing their environments moment by moment, based on mood and necessity. What happens next? She asked, the question that had been troubling her for weeks. You've created paradise, but paradise doesn't last forever. Eventually, challenges will arise that even your technology can't solve. Reed considered this seriously, his gaze moving from the playing children to the stars visible through the transparent walls. Then we'll face those challenges together, as partners rather than competitors. We've learned that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any single species can comprehend alone. Whatever comes next will require all of our combined wisdom and capabilities. A message indicator appeared in Reed's field of vision, though Cross could see nothing. He paused briefly, processing information that came to him through means she couldn't fathom. The exploration fleet has made contact with something beyond the galactic rim, he announced. An intelligence that makes even our capabilities look primitive. They're requesting a diplomatic meeting. Cross felt her pulse quicken with familiar anticipation, then realized she was experiencing excitement rather than fear. Another test for your new galactic order? Another opportunity for growth, Reed corrected gently. We've created a foundation of cooperation and abundance. Now we get to discover what we can build on that foundation when faced with challenges we can't imagine. The plaza around them continued its quiet bustle of daily life, children playing while adults from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old council system. Gardens grew in spaces that had once housed weapons, libraries flourished where armies had once drilled, and art blossomed in chambers that had echoed with the sounds of war. Admiral Beth Cross, veteran of countless battles and architect of Imperial expansion, watched the sun set over a galaxy that had learned to choose peace over power. She had witnessed the end of one age and the beginning of another, and for the first time in her long military career, she found herself eager to see what tomorrow would bring. The age of empire was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And then, somewhere beyond the rim of known space, new challenges waited to test whether the galaxy's hard-won wisdom could survive contact with the vast, unknowable universe that lay beyond their transformed civilization. Reed stood quietly beside her, no longer the terrifying figure who had announced humanity's return, but simply another gardener tending to the greatest garden ever planted, a galaxy where every species had the opportunity to grow into whatever they chose to become.